Thanks for joining us today on this Ghost Kitchen webinar. I would like to welcome everyone to this Ghost Kitchen webinar presented by backofhouse.io. Back of House is a digital marketplace where owner-operators can go to understand and find restaurant technology solutions that will elevate their business. You can find our guests today on backofhouse.io, as well as reviews from other owners and operators. I'm Bethany Zach, GM of Back of House and Director of Internal Innovations at Relish Works. We've come together today with a panel of experts who support operators of ghost kitchen concepts to tackle two aspects of running a ghost kitchen concept that continue to challenge operators breaking into this new segment. The two topics are developing a customer experience and optimizing your menu for profitability. Our goal today is to provide tactical tips and provide access to our panelists and experts that you can leverage after today and in your business. So let's start by introducing our customer experience experts. We're going to start with Bill Stavro, who is our CEO and founder of Food Hall, a virtual brand building and menu development company. And I'll have you do a better job introducing your company, Bill, in just a minute. And we also have Amina Jelani, COO and co-founder at Sociavore, an e-commerce platform that specializes in online ordering and marketing. We also have Josh Sharkey, who is our CEO and co-founder of Mees, and he is going to join us at the back half of this when we get more into the menu side of ghost kitchens. Okay, I'm going to dive in. So Bill, Food Hall is all about delivering great food and a great brand and making great food accessible in markets where it isn't really available today. So I really want to start with you from this 10,000 foot view about brand elements. Let's first start though with a quick overview of what Food Hall is and how you got started.
Sure. Good morning. Thanks for having me, Bethany. So the Food Hall, first and foremost, what we always like to point out is we are a operator first business. I'm still a brick and mortar restaurateur. We still own and operate restaurants here in the Chicago market, and our goal is to really help the independent operator navigate this clearly unique time. Important to point out that we identified this space pre-pandemic. Us and our group and the Viviani group started this company back in late 19 into early 20, and clearly the pandemic was an accelerant to the space and to a lot of things. But that piece of the puzzle is a huge thing for us. Is really making sure that the independent operator has a profitable way to utilize their excess capacity. And the way we've taken our approach to that is by taking notable celebrity chef concepts, and licensing them. First of all, systemizing them in a way that is scalable and easy to execute. But secondly, brings brand credibility to a virtual concept, and then license them to kitchens right now around the Midwest to reproduce the products for their own profitability.
Great. Thank you so much. One thing that I've learned about Food Hall is you've talked, like when I've heard you speak to others and when you and I have spoken before, we've talked a lot about developing personal brands of these chefs and really helping them grow their business. So can you share with us first what this means and how you've done this in the past and what key things that the operators that are listening today should be thinking about and what they need to know to do this well?
Sure. So what we've done with the current chefs that we work with, so Fabio Viviani, Rick Tremonto, on down that list, is we think it's imperative to have a brand story. And our concept anyway, and we think that this is a huge part of the virtual space, is really the term access. And what we mean by that is the ability for a chef to actually access consumers they otherwise wouldn't in markets probably where they wouldn't go and build a brick and mortar establishment, probably wouldn't have financial viability to do that. And as well, and even more compelling, is the consumer having this unique ability to now have a cuisine, a unique concept delivered to their doorstep where otherwise it wouldn't be available. great example. We have locations around the Chicago metro area. We have locations in Wisconsin. We have a Brown Deer, Wisconsin location where residents of a Milwaukee suburb now can actually get Sienna Tavern pastas delivered to their doorstep. Otherwise, they'd have to come to Chicago to have that award-winning cuisine. So we strongly believe in the idea of brand story and always execution, and creating a systematic way in which a fulfillment partner can execute that. But to attract consumers to, what is a clearly pretty crowded space, having a story that really speaks to them and a uniqueness that access brings.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think the key elements are of a story? Like if you could kind of say, thematically, where I see operators doing this well, where your chefs are doing this well, like what are those key thematic elements of a story that people should be bringing forward?
So, on our end, our marketing team really focuses on having a story that has, we like to call it soul or durability, where there's, the story really focuses again on access, clearly, but on quality and for our fulfillment partners, when we speak to them, it's all about being able to bring them concepts that they otherwise probably wouldn't have the ability to create themselves. They probably wouldn't have the talent on staff, and definitely don't have the story. So the story really is driven by the chef, their history, their knowledge, their background, and then many times also the restaurants that they're associated with. So Viviani in our group is associated with Sienna Tavern. And even if someone doesn't know what that is in markets far from Chicago, really explaining that and creating this buzz around the idea that it's a real concept. I think part of the problem in the space is that there are a lot of concepts that don't really have a story at all. And I think that is a difficult sell when the consumer can just flip page through page on third-party platforms. It's such a unique way of shopping when you're, in the traditional sense of going out to dinner. You go to a restaurant, you sit down, the chances of you leaving because you didn't like the menu are pretty slim. In this, it's almost as if, it's like it's become like shopping for anything else where pages just flip. And so having a story that is compelling is clearly what makes someone stop. And that's what we've, through our unit economics have proven with, what we consider to have best in class, revenues per fulfillment partner and repeat consumer behavior.
That's great. So what I heard is, really thinking about the soul, who you are, your history, what experience you have, and being able to really tell that story and elevate that story. I'm curious, in your experience as you've worked in this industry, what are some of the don'ts that you would share with this audience in terms of make sure you don't do these things if you want to see, be successful?
Yeah, I think, it starts with, I think embracing this space for operators is number one. So many are still really naive to the idea of, this utilizing of their excess capacity. So I think it starts with just starting. I'm a big believer that you have to just get started and embrace the space. I think the don'ts, I guess, to me, I don't know that there's any absolute don'ts that don't apply to every business, right? So poor execution always fails. That's a clear, step one. But I think where there are pitfalls is not having a marketing strategy, not having a brand that you can speak to in some way, whether it's one that you can develop yourself and leverage perhaps the current customer base you have, not necessarily knowing third-party platforms and what algorithms and how those work. There is so much there. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to really understand how to drive traffic, both through branding and a story, but also through the algorithms and what is measured by the third-party platforms and how you get what's kind of been coined as, SEO, but within these platforms, things like, how long does a driver wait when they get to your location? Do you keep consistent hours? It's interesting, right? So many of these things are very much associated with traditional brick and mortar and what makes you successful or not. But it's just having a focus a little bit on something different. So it's the same theory. If a driver waiting too long kind of equates to a consumer waiting too long in your restaurant, right? Or inconsistent hours on delivery are no different than inconsistent hours when you're running brick and mortar. It's just not a good business practice. And I guess one way I would describe this is many times I think operators look at these added revenue streams like a virtual concept as less important, or as kind of an oversight on their operations. And I think it's really important to adopt the same principles that you have running your core business to this. So I think those are the biggest pitfalls. Really having a strategy, having a well thought out menu, all of the basic things that are traditional restaurateurs should be doing if they're a good operator, and then applying those, as well as just keeping your eye on, it's the same theories, but keeping your eye on certain different metrics, packaging, et cetera. So I think, simply put, I think that's really what it is. But I do believe that from a branding standpoint, just catching someone's eye is a key component, and having a story, whether it's a story you can come up with on your own as an extension of your business, or, one that we could provide.
Yeah, I love your message there. What I'm kind of taking away from that is, overall, it's about intentionality. It's about intentionality about your message. It's intentionality about your menu. It's intentionality about your customer experience, and really paying attention to those things, because they're not experiencing the hospitality service that you would normally get when you sit down in an establishment. So you've got to find these other ways to make sure that they are experiencing your brand through receiving your food and experiencing you online.
Yeah, that's really accurate. I'm sorry to jump in, but hospitality is a term that we use so much internally. Like how can we, that's what we've prided our own restaurant group on, is hospitality. We believe that our success has really been focused on that guest first experience, and making people feel important, and making sure they know that they come first when they walk in our doors. And how can we take that through whatever measures we have through a delivery platform or through delivery, and execute that for the consumer in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's a lost piece of the puzzle in delivery, but I believe that there are ways to do it. And we internally look at that as a huge focus of where we're going, and try to make decisions that in small little elements make somebody feel like that when they get a delivery from one of our fulfillment partners.
Yeah. I think that's, I think there's an art to that too. So I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll circle back to and talk a little bit more about third-party delivery platforms and standing on those things. But, so Bill, once these things are established, and once the operators that are listening today have kind of thought about these things and have processes and systems in place to deliver these things, how do you recommend operators make sure that their brand lasts, especially as this segment continues to grow and just get flooded with new virtual brand concepts and ghost kitchen concepts?
Sure. So clearly, first it starts with generating the revenue, but again, it kind of goes back to what we just talked about, which is the same practices applying that any successful business has. Which is execution. It's iteration and execution. So making sure you're listening to your consumer, understanding what's resonating with them. I think being nimble in which concepts you're doing, trying to be on trend as best you can. But again, the same practices that applied to my dad when we started our family business. My dad immigrated here in 1947, started a family business soon after. Those same principles still apply today. So great execution always wins. especially after you've established the brand. So when you've established the brand, continuing that, again, the focus may be different. The focus in delivery might be on better packaging, menu design that's built for delivery. It's interesting. Probably most people on this, and myself included, are used to having the ability to interact with our consumer in the moment. So many of our best customers in our brick and mortar setting are customers that at some point we disappointed, and we were given the opportunity to turn a negative into a positive by the way we treated them and making them feel important. And it's really difficult to do in this space, and it just makes the immediate execution that much more important, because we don't get that opportunity. The third-party platforms make it difficult for us to communicate with our consumer, and therefore it's hard for them to communicate. Number one, there's a lot of friction involved in the communication process between consumer and the fulfillment partner, and so it's really important that orders go out correctly. The big challenge in this space, people have almost come to expect, a little bit of poor execution, and that their delivery is going to come. It's not going to look as good as it should, or perhaps there's items missing, and so on. So those are areas where you can shine. So those are great execution, but with a focus on delivery, and what are the metrics within delivery to do that, right? And like we spoke about, what are the things that third parties look for? What are the things that we can do for a consumer that will make the experience memorable in a positive way, and finding ways to communicate with that consumer and listen to them. But again, it's interesting. I think sometimes we all overthink a little bit of what we should be doing, when the reality of it is it's exactly what we've all been doing, just taking a look at perhaps a couple of different metrics that we need to be looking at. But execution is key, keeping the message on track, and building a menu that is, compelling for the consumer.
That's great. Thank you so much, Bill. I'm going to transition over to Amina for just a moment. Amina, Sociavore is a platform that delivers first impressions and really enables brands to reach customers and help grow their business. So when Bill was talking about being intentional about marketing strategy, Sociavore to me is the channel that operators can use to execute against their marketing strategy. So but that's my word. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Sociavore in your words, and then we'll get into some tips and tactics from your end.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited to be here, Bethany. And I have to say, I really liked what Bill was saying in terms of authenticity, and a lot of the things that he spoke about are really relevant to what we do at Sociavore. So what is Sociavore? So Sociavore is an all-in-one platform for managing your restaurant online. Our focus has really been on the independent restaurant space, and we actually built the product from the ground up based on our knowledge coming from the independent restaurant space. So similar to Bill, I come from a restaurant family, and what we were finding was people were finding our restaurant online first, as people were exploring online, as opposed to, before, when my father-in-law opened the restaurant in the 80s, it was more of, you'd pass by, you walk in, and that brick and mortar experience. So we, essentially, we couldn't find a platform that was really built for independent restaurants, and really focused on having all of those tools built right into the platform. So within Sociavore, you have, a website builder, no code. It has all of the tools that you need, like online ordering, digital gift cards, the ability to sell tickets, reservations, and it's all wrapped up into one platform, so it's easy for the independent restaurant to manage everything all in one space.
Great. Yeah, so I think of Sociavore as like a great partner in terms of where people can house their ghost kitchen concepts online and interact and experience the hospitality that Bill was talking about.
Absolutely. Like what we found is, we work with lots of mom and pops all the way to, multi-location, multi-concept restaurant groups. But one thing that we've been seeing is a lot of ghost kitchens that have been leveraging the platform, because, as it was said before, you need to be able to showcase your brand. It needs to be authentic. People are looking for you online. So you need to make sure that you have that presented right away on your website, everywhere on the internet, because they're not going to find you like they traditionally do with brick and mortar. And Social4 helps with that.
That's great. So, okay, so we're going to get into some nitty gritty stuff here. So in your experience, Amina, what are the key components of a strong go-to-market strategy for the operators that are listening today that are really starting to, tackle this for the first time? And maybe give some great examples of who's exemplifying this in your mind.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of, what we've seen has worked really well is it starts off with creating that amazing brand, as Bill said. So it needs to be authentic. You need to really think about, curation and what your menu looks like, because there are so many concepts out there that are being added to the third-party platforms and that are just being added, that it needs to resonate with, the market. So I think that would be the first thing. And really think, when we talk to independent restaurants, is what do you do really well? What do you kind of want to explore? How can you take that and make it into a concept and a brand? And with that branding, it's, going into, you need to have a nice logo, colors. Food photography is so key in this space, because that's how people are, they're going to look and they're going to order directly from that. So just being able to really showcase everything nicely online is something that we really tell brands to do. But then also, in terms of where you would want to be, I think, putting yourself out there on the third parties is good, omni-channel approach. But what we really focus on at Social4 is creating those direct channels, because what we know with third parties is, it's a great marketing tool in terms of kind of getting your brand across. But in terms of that direct guest relationship, the third parties own that guest relationship. And so one thing that we find really important is being able to create that direct connection with the guests. And that's when, a place like Social4, you're able to actually, have that direct guest experience. The other thing too, I'll mention is that, with what we've seen works best is people search you online, and Google is still the most, the place that they're going to find your brand. So it's really important to make sure that you have your, Google My Business profile set up with Google food ordering, because that's where people can find you, and then you can have that direct connection as they then skip over to your website, and you can own that relationship.
That's great. I think, just to kind of summarize what I heard you say is making sure that your website is up, that it exemplifies your brand, it feels authentic to your diners and your customers. Food photography is really key. That is what's going to get people super excited about wanting to eat your food and experience it. And then also, I hope I'm capturing everything. Making sure third-party delivery systems are set up. Google, since that seems to be the channel that a lot of diners are coming through, and making sure that's connecting back to your native, your site, so that you can capture more revenue and the profitability of it versus using third-party delivery systems, which, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen. Like, I definitely tell people, it's an omni-channel approach. You want to be on those platforms, just because you can, reach customers, especially like if you're in a local market and you're trying to get more customers to see your brand. But then what you really want to try to do is you want to try to encourage that customer on repeat to order directly from you, because that's where you're able to leverage that data. And I think the key thing is data is king here in terms of what you as the operator can actually use to then make adjustments to what you're doing, maybe test and learn and pivot. And so when you have a direct ordering channel set up, you're able to do that. So one thing that we do at Social4 is what we've seen works really well is restaurants are able to, create that full stack with the digital guest experience. So that means, they land on your brand and then they're able to order directly. And then we partner with DoorDash Drive and Postmates, which are white label delivery services, so that you're able to then utilize that driver network, maintain the data, but then also you're not, cutting into your profitability with the commissions, because these are commission-free ways of being able to deliver your food. I think I missed one thing too, Bethany. So you asked me in terms of brands that I think exemplify this as well, really well. redjungle.la, they're a concept based out of downtown Los Angeles, and what they really focus on with their ghost kitchen is their brand is focused on delivering really healthy but kind of drool-worthy food. So they're focused on, always baked chicken wings. And I think they've done a really excellent job just kind of showcasing the brand, putting it together, and then also, making sure that they're always, from a marketing standpoint, pushing messaging, because you don't want your brand to be lost. So that's another key component, is the content. So a lot of times what we tell, brands that we work with is, that content calendar where you're pushing out your messaging is really important, because, you need to make sure that you're telling your story, you're pushing out authentic content, and it needs to be done on a regular basis, just because it can be lost. And so I think Red Jungle does a really good job of that.
That's great. That's great. Thanks. I was going to ask you about, what operators should be doing on social media channels to make sure that they're staying in front of diners. So you talked about content and making sure they're pushing out content on a regular basis. What else is there anything else you would add to that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think in terms of, social media, it's important. It's a way that you can really get reach. Where we think, and we've seen that restaurants have gotten value, is Instagram, of course. Like, you want to, especially with the ghost brand, like that whole Instagrammable sort of concept of people finding you on Instagram and then ordering is something that I think is really important. And how you can do this is, with the independent restaurant brands that we work with, a lot of them already have, brick and mortar concepts, and they have a following. And so you can leverage that following when it comes to your new brand as well, in terms of that audience. In terms of Facebook, I think that Facebook groups are a really awesome place. So especially if you look at where people are kind of going in the local market that you're trying to address, there are Facebook food groups and restaurant groups that exist, and being able to leverage those, push out your brand, tell people that you exist, is something that we see works. And then also in terms of just being able to produce content that people can reshare is also something that I think is great, because you can leverage your audience that you have. And then if you have content that is, trendy or reshareable, then they will reshare to their audiences in terms of your users, and that can also help grow your reach. So I think those are areas that I think have worked. And I mentioned this before, Google. I see this so many times where you don't have your Google My Business profile set up. Google food ordering, again, is a great way because it's direct. So although it's not social media, I think in terms of just being able to get that leveraging search where you can really get that direct connection is important. And then, making sure you're getting reviews as well. So that ties into social media. You want people to reshare your stuff, but then you also want them to go back and review your concept. And doing that with Google is a way that you can leverage. And then that creates that long tail where other users will find you, see what people think. So I think it's all connected that way.
These are great tips. Thank you so much, Amina. I have a couple of other questions, but I'm going to, just for the purpose of time and making sure that we get to Josh and leave room at the end for questions, I'm going to move on and then maybe circle back with a few other thoughts too. So thank you both, Bill and Amina. That was incredibly helpful, and I think gave this group some really great tips and things that they can take away and implement in their own brands. So as we pivot, I'm going to go over to Josh. Hi, Josh.
Hello there.
Thanks for being with us today. You come to us with experience working for really popular restaurants and running your own restaurants. So, you're just like Bill and Amina, you are an operator. It's in your blood. And so this business inside and out. And what I really want to focus in on with you is profitability, because I think this is something that's hard for a lot of operators. And so I'm hoping that's where we can spend our time just talking about, the tips and tricks to that in terms of a concept. But first, let's start with Mies. I want to hear a little bit about your story and what Mies does and how it can help operators.
Well, as you said, I think it's also just important as a sort of a backdrop that my background is as a chef and restaurant owner for the last 20 plus years. And so prior to ever sort of building Mies, that's what I did for most of my career. So Mies is first and foremost a culinary company. We happen to deploy technology to sort of solve a lot of the problems that we've found within the culinary world. But essentially, it's a recipe development and training platform to organize, cost, train, scale, and share your content. And so, I mean, for me as a chef and as a business owner, I was really frustrated that there was not a tool that was built for all of our culinary work. There was sort of, there's accounting software that and you can sort of do inventory and things like that on there. And then there's kind of like, home recipe applications, but there wasn't really anything built for professional, culinary professionals. And so that's what we're trying to solve for here. The way that I always sort of try to talk about it is, designers have Figma or Adobe, and photographers have Photoshop, and architects have AutoCAD. And we need something of our own. And so that is really what Mies is really meant to be. And there's a lot, we can sort of talk about the details of why it is what it is if you want, but in a nutshell, that's sort of, what Mies is built for.
Yeah, I think that's great. My first question to you is, for this group in particular, some of, we really targeted people that were stepping into ghost kitchen concepts. You've been at this for a while, and it's what led you to me. So I'm curious if maybe you can give us your thoughts on why is it so hard to scale food well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will say this has sort of been my mission in food space for the last 10 plus years is that sort of problem, is how do you scale food well? And it is possible to do, but it takes some work, right? And I think first and foremost, it's because it's already hard to create good food, right? Like to build, and I mean, his point, there's so much that goes into it, and you have to create something that's compelling and that's special and unique and craveable, and not to mention you have to make sure that it gets made on time every day at service, and that's already really difficult, and it takes a lot of time. So on top of that, you then have to, of course, memorialize what you're doing, right? Memorialize the process and capture every step of that. And why it's so hard is that sort of last sort of piece of the puzzle, memorializing what you're doing, standardizing the way that you think about your food and how you execute it, is just more work, right? But it really is the juice is really worth the squeeze. And you'll find that when you do that, you can scale so much faster. And if you don't do it, unfortunately, it's very often that you have to become a solo act, right? Because you're either going to do it all yourself, or you're going to have to be able to create systems and processes that will help you to scale with the team.
Yeah, I can only relate on a personal level, just in terms of when you make things and you're just experimenting at home. I never document anything, and I don't, because it takes time. And you probably, as a chef, you probably spend more time just wanting to create and have fun rather than set aside time for the actual process, the thing that's actually going to help you scale and grow your business. It just doesn't, I can only imagine that just feels at odds with where your passion typically lies.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say, first and foremost, that there is a bit of a not a narcissism, but you're creating something, right? That you're giving to the world, right? And so it's me. Here's my food, or our company's food for you, and I think that for me, what I've found that sort of, as you grow and as you create a business out of this, that one of the truest measures of what great food is not something that you can create really well, that tastes really good if I make it for you. But the truest measure is really like if it can be made just as well or better when I'm not around, right? And that actually is one of the truest measures of great food in a food business, is if you can do that. And I think that there's actually even more pleasure you get out of that once you start to do it, because you start to see that you see your team executing this, and you're executing your vision, and you see your vision or your business's vision starting to be executed at scale. And it's way more gratifying than, the time I actually cook this dish for you so I see you eat it. So I think that it's just sort of perspective, really.
Yeah. I think about Bill and Food Hall, like it is essential for you to be able, like for your chefs to be able to do exactly what Josh is talking about in order to scale and trust somebody else to execute. So Josh, I'm wondering if we can think about, like, for these operators who are stepping into this and probably are thinking about the future and how they grow, what are some of the things that you would share with them in terms of how do you tackle this? Like, how do you make time for these things? How do you get organized? What do they need to do to deliver good food at scale and stay profitable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, to start, and I can't stress this enough, really, you have to have accurate recipes and detailed process. And if you start that way, it's obviously going to be a lot easier to continue that way. And I don't want to sit here, I'm not here to plug Mies that much, but I will say that's literally what we built Mies for, is because it's really hard to do that already. And so we tried to build a tool that allows you to sort of like write your recipes, write your process the way that you've always done, but get all of the output that you need for sort of cost and scale and training and things as you go. But I think that, one of the most important things is to be explicit. Too much of what you see in terms of recipes or process or menus is implicit. And you can't over communicate enough, what you want to have, executed, how you want it to be executed. And so there's, first and foremost, I would say, accuracy is probably one of the most important things. And then I really love the sort of the parallels here and the continuity that sort of from what Bill and Amina have said, because execution is everything. It really is. Like, food cost is something that, again, you can dial in, and it's important to sort of understand your food cost. You need accurate recipes for that. You need to understand the yields and the conversions of all the things that you're using, so that you understand, the true sort of theoretical cost of your menu, so your baseline. But then once you have that, right, that you should be at a 25.2%, let's say, right? So, and you have some sort of threshold of error. That's great. That's super important. Without that, you really can't, you have no sort of like barometer of where you should be. But after that, it's all about execution, right? Because, first and foremost, there's way more waste that happens when you don't execute properly, right? Because you're not accounting for things, and you throw things out because they're not made right, or the customer doesn't like it. And also, in terms of hospitality and service, customers will come back. I mean, we all know, like, if we taste something that's great at a restaurant, next time we go there and it's not the same, I'm scared to go back, because I don't want to like waste my time and money again going to get something that wasn't the same thing I got last time, because what's going to happen this time? So, the more that you dial in your process and your content and your recipes, so that your team can execute it really well every time, the less waste you're going to have, and the more you'll be able to scale. In terms of sort of tactically, some of the things that we think about is cross utilization, right? And so like the kind of the cliche one is to make sure you're using ingredients in lots of recipes or lots of menu items, and that's great, and you should. But to take it a step further, really, you also want to cross-utilize recipes, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is obviously, you're going to optimize prep labor, you're going to optimize cost and and things like that. But this is also how you build your unique flavor profile, right? So you might have like a really great house vinaigrette that you make with with plum vinegar and mango pickle or something like that, and it's delicious, and you put that on your salad. But you can start to layer that into other dishes that you have, and now you have less things that you're prepping. Maybe you want to make a salsa verde, and instead of making it, your traditional one, you just fold in chopped herbs and garlic and chilies to that house vinaigrette. Now you have this special thing that that no one else has, that's unique, that it's going to pop, and people are going to think about it twice. And you've also saved prep labor, right? So cross utilizing, I can't really sort of like undervalue enough is it's not just sort of helping you save time, but it's also how you're going to start to build your flavors, of what makes your concept unique. And then, of course, like less is always more, right? The more menu items you have, the more recipes, the more ingredients, the more opportunity for waste, more opportunity for, things to be inconsistent. And also, there's, decision fatigue with customers, right? Like people want things that are easy. And if you have too many options, it's hard, right? And then the last thing I'll say is as you're sort of engineering menus, I think that food cost percent always tends to be sort of like the target that we're thinking about. Like I want a 25% food cost. And I'm sure everybody was aware, but that essentially means that like 1/4 of the cost of this dish goes to food. But I think that there isn't enough stress put on the gross margin of a dish because at the end of the day, it's just dollars that are going to your bottom line, right? So the perfect example here is I have a lobster dish, right? It costs me I sell it for $24. And I have a 50% food cost, let's say, right? So it cost me $12. So I'm making $12 on this lobster dish. My food cost is really bad. 50% is not a great food cost, but I'm making $12. I have another dish that's $12 I sell it for, and I have a 25% food cost. Well, that's great. My food cost is lower, but I'm only making $9 on it. So at the end of the day, I'm still making more money on the lobster dish. And so all that to say, sort of, you want to look at profit margin just as much as your food cost percentage, because at the end of the day, that's really the sort of dollars going to the bottom line. So there's more obviously I can go into, but those I think sort of like some of the key ones that we try to hit.
Those are great. You answered a lot of my questions before I even got to them. No, it's great. You were way ahead of it. One of the things that I've heard you talk about in the past has just been, how difficult pricing can be. There's a cap on what you can charge. So I'm wondering if maybe you can just talk a little bit more about how you have handled pricing, especially, I think we're in a situation right now in the world where people are coming out of this pandemic and we're excited to go eat. We're also probably a little bit cautious about how we spend and where we spend. So maybe you can just share some thoughts on pricing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, again, I think maybe I mentioned this in another talk, but in every industry, but most specifically in the food industry, there's a ceiling to what we can charge for things, right? There's a perceived value of something. I can't charge $100 for a turkey sandwich, right? It's not like an iPad that I can charge $1,200 for because even if it cost me $10, right? That's just not how it works. So there is a ceiling to what we can charge. So the most important thing is you really need to know what the cost of your menu is, right? You need to know your theoretical cost, so how you're doing against that. Like, that's one of the most important things. And of course, like I said, executing consistently is one of the best ways to do that. As you start thinking about sort of engineering your menu, knowing that there is a sort of a ceiling to sort of how much you can charge. To Amina's point, data is really like where we really can sort of shine here, right? Because of course you want to look at your menu mix, right? You want to start looking at what's selling the most, what's selling the least, the things that are selling the most. You want to make sure that they don't cost a lot or you have a good profit margin on them. The things that are selling the least, you want to either get rid of or change or iterate upon. You get feedback, and then just sort of if I can get a little granular, I think one thing that we always look at in our restaurants is menu items that are purchased by new customers versus menu items purchased by repeat customers, because there's a big sort of like kind of cognitive bias that you start to assume about a menu item that seems like it's doing really well because you're selling a lot of it. But if you're selling this menu item 90% of the time to new customers and almost no new repeat customers are buying it, well, it means that this item's probably really compelling, right? It sounds really good. There's got some ingredients in there that are popping to people, but no one's reordering it, which means something else is going wrong, right? It means that like either you're not executing it well, or it just doesn't taste good. And so that's sort of, there's a lot that you can do with that information. Like it could be that if you are selling it really well, what's compelling about this item, and let's think about how we can sort of talk about other items that way, or use those ingredients in other items. But you know, if it's actually selling really well, and you're getting positive feedback, maybe it's just like your staff isn't selling well enough and you just like sell it to customers when they come back. So we always look at new versus repeat items to understand like sort of how our menu is doing outside of kind of the typical sort of mix.
That's a great tip. I hadn't thought about that. That's a good data point to definitely pay attention to. Okay, so I have one last question, and I'm going to ask Josh this first, but Amina and Bill, I think you guys can both really jump in here too. So doing this type of work takes a lot of time and discipline, like when you start having to be, as Josh said, like explicit. And the restaurant world, time can be really hard to find. So I'm curious how, like, if you guys could give some advice to operators, how do you guys make time for this in your business? What's the level of priority? Like, how much time should they be carving out to be very intentional about profitability, menu engineering, these things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always love the quote by like Eisenhower, like what is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. And I also think that if Dwight was in the restaurant world, he would hate it and probably not survive, because unfortunately, in the restaurant business, that's sometimes just not true. Sometimes, you just have a lot of fires burning, and you have to, you have to play the whack-a-mole because, when service starts, that's just what it is. And especially as a business owner, it's really sort of myopic to think that like you can just focus on what's important just in that moment, because a lot of times you don't have that choice, right? So I think that for me, at least, the way that I try to sort of approach this in business is maybe sort of kind of circling the question, in that I really believe in empowering our teams, right? So giving sort of putting the onus on our team to to think about like how to solve these problems as well, right? So I think about like cooks, as a cook, really your station is your temple, right? And you're sort of maniacally focused on executing that station really well. Or maybe you're the chef de cuisine, you're the kitchen manager, and you're just focusing on that kitchen. And so I try to give little snippets of what we're trying to accomplish to each person, and say, hey, I want you to just focus on our appetizers, and we need a 24% target on every single one of these items. And it looks like we're a little bit above that, and we're wasting. So can you start to think about what we could do to sort of reduce costs, maybe save some time while we're executing? And you'd be surprised the things that you learn, because no matter how much we think about our business, the ones that are on the field all the time, they just have way more insight into what's going on. I remember vividly at my last business, we had these heirloom baked beans that we made, and we held them in a steam table for service, and we knew exactly what the cost was, and we knew sort of like how much we baked in the waste from a little bit of the steam table drying out. But we were still sort of like losing, we were still wasting beans. We didn't know why. And it turns out that, between like 9:30 and 10:45 on weeknights, there was this lull where like the beans just sat for much longer than usual. And we ended up wasting more. They dried out more, and they ended up throwing them out. And, we knew that because a cook that was working that shift was like, yeah, we waste a bunch of that time. Then there's a pop at midnight. And I asked him to try and figure out a solution. Typically I would go and try and solve something, and he Googled like a Teflon pan and was like, we can cook this to order at that time. He saved us probably, a few $1,000 over the course of the year, and he felt great about it. Right. That's a microcosm of sort of like, of that sort of, approach. But I think that we can't do it all. And the more that we sort of empower our teams, the more that sort of they feel more engaged, and the more that we can sort of save time.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip for any leader, honestly, is trusting and empowering your teams. And then you have more time to focus on strategy and growing your business. Amina and Bill, anything you guys would add to that?
So I think for myself, and I know Bill mentioned this in the beginning, I think that when you're, on a mission to create a ghost brand, you have to treat it like you would with a brick and mortar. Like, it's not just something that you would just do on the side, like a side hustle. It's something you want to have like intentions with. So with that, you do need to set aside time to make sure that you're working on that business alongside if you have other concepts, and not just making it kind of something that you try and it would, if you don't put the effort in, it's going to fail. So, from the onset, making sure that you have the intention of actually putting forth, time and effort into that so that you can actually make this into something viable. And I think I really loved what Josh said. So I think when you're doing that, you need to set KPIs. So, what is this business? What's the focus of this? What are you trying to solve? What are you trying to achieve? And then with that, you can put together key performance indicators that then you can tie back to, so that you can see, how you're progressing. So with that, you got to put time and focus into the business, and then you need to test and learn. Like, you can't just push it out and think it's gonna do well. If you launch something, put it on the third-party apps, and then just pray that everything's gonna go well. It's all about intention, and then being able to circle back and leverage your data and make sure that you're readjusting and pivoting, because then that's where you're going to be able to create something that's lasting.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit. I mean, both of you guys did a great job explaining it. I think, the industry has a tendency to be, from an operations standpoint, so immediate that at times you really get drawn into the day-to-day craziness of the business, especially in the smaller independent world where, you're struggling to find staff. You're really just trying to make sure that the customer is being serviced. And at times a lot of things slip through the cracks, and it really has a huge impact on profitability and on consistency. I think, some of the metrics Josh talked about are really great ideas. I mean, we're actually, plug for Mies, we're implementing Mies into our platform just because it's a great way to communicate recipes, communicate with our fulfillment partners. I just think that the independent especially really needs to start adopting technology to understand their costs, creating processes that are repeatable so that there is that level of consistency. Creating, all of those things really lead to profitability in a variety of ways. Many times it's just in profitability just through pricing power, right? So, pricing power is such a huge aspect of the business that I think many times doesn't get addressed, in that comes from branding. It comes, we believe and we've proven on our platform that having a brand and having something to refer back to creates pricing power. In the virtual world, it's difficult to do. Much of the pricing power many times comes from a facility. You go to a brick and mortar restaurant and you walk in, you can almost know what the price is going to be, what level of pricing you're going to have. The virtual world, I don't think you have that. So it comes from branding, it comes from execution, and so on. But it's difficult, but independent operators need to prioritize profitability and systems, because it's kind of the can't see the forest through the trees type mentality, where you're so busy doing everything you do every day that you forget what the real reason you're there for is at times. But I think adopting technology and really making sure the consistency, pricing, and so on is in place, and that, again, going back to what we've all said, it's all about execution. It's all about, since we're talking about virtual brands here, it's all about really prioritizing those virtual brands. And not, I think that is the biggest challenge I see, is I think too many operators view these as, to use Amina's term, a side hustle, and that inevitably is destined for failure. It needs to be taken on with the same priority as your core business.
This is great, you guys. I mean, an hour flew by talking to each of you. I can't thank you enough. I think that the information that you shared is incredibly valuable. I think it's good. I mean, you guys talked about this, like a lot of this is universal and just for the restaurant industry. And while we were focused on ghost kitchen concepts and brands, anybody that's listening to this and that will hear this, I think will take a lot away from this conversation. So thank you. And I just want to say, like, for those that are listening, all of these brands can be found on backofhouse.io. I encourage you to reach out and see how they can help with your concept. And just thanks again to Josh, Bill, and Amina for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.